My sister's stupid little game left me with a broken arm. My parents laughed it off, but an MRI changed everything and turned my whole family upside down. Stick with me, because this isn't just about a broken arm. It's about how one moment uncovered the truth I had been living with my whole life. My name is Jennifer, I'm 17, and I live with my parents, Linda and Mark, and my little sister Rachel, who's 14. From the outside, we look like a regular family, but inside, it's completely different. Rachel has always been the center of attention. She knows how to put on an innocent smile, how to act sweet when adults are watching, but behind closed doors, she's manipulative and jealous. She hated whenever I achieved something, and she had a way of turning everything into a competition. That afternoon, I was sitting in the backyard, trying to enjoy some quiet time. Rachel came out with her usual smirk. "Jen, let's play a game," she said in that fake cheerful voice that always meant trouble. I told her I wasn't interested, but she kept pushing. Finally, she pointed to the tree near the fence and dared me to stand on an old garden chair to reach the low branch. The chair was worn out, and I knew it wasn't safe, but Rachel stood there, watching me with that grin. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of calling me scared. I climbed onto the chair, and the moment I shifted my weight, it started to wobble. Rachel's giggle made my stomach twist. Before I could step down, the chair collapsed completely, and I fell hard onto the ground. A sharp pain shot through my arm, and I screamed. It felt like my bones were on fire. My wrist bent at an angle that made me sick to even look at. Rachel burst out laughing, not nervous laughter, but the kind that said she was enjoying every second. When my parents came outside, I thought finally someone would help me. Instead, my dad shook his head and said, "Jennifer, you're always so clumsy." My mom sighed, almost amused, and said I was overreacting. I sat there crying, clutching my arm, while they dismissed me like it was nothing. Rachel just stood behind them, smirking like she'd won. In that moment, the pain in my arm was unbearable, but the pain of realizing that my parents weren't going to take me seriously hurt even more. I didn't know it then, but this so-called game was about to change everything in ways none of us could escape. I woke up the next morning with pain so sharp it felt like knives were carving through my arm. My wrist was swollen twice its size, purple and angry. Every time I tried to move, the pain made my eyes water. I begged my mom to take me to the hospital, but she barely glanced at me. "It's just a bruise, Jennifer. Stop acting like you're dying," she said while making coffee. My dad agreed, shaking his head, telling me I needed to toughen up. I sat at the kitchen table, holding my arm close, and Rachel walked in with that smug look on her face. She leaned close so only I could hear her. "You're always the victim, aren't you?" she whispered, her voice dripping with mockery. "Mom and Dad see right through you." Then she smiled sweetly at them and asked if she could have pancakes for breakfast. I wanted to scream. It wasn't fair. The pain was real, yet nobody cared. I felt invisible in my own house, like my voice didn't matter. They had already decided I was exaggerating, and Rachel had already painted me as the dramatic older sister who complained about everything. All day I tried to rest, but every movement sent a wave of pain shooting up my arm. I couldn't even pick up a glass of water without biting my lip to keep from crying. When I asked again if I could go to the hospital, my dad snapped. "Enough, Jennifer. We're not wasting money on your whining." That word, whining, cut almost as deep as the injury itself. By evening, I couldn't take it anymore. My hand had started to tingle, and I was terrified something was seriously wrong. I knew my parents would never help me, so I decided I had to help myself. Our neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, had always been kind to me. With my good hand, I texted her from the old phone I had hidden in my room. I told her I'd fallen, and I couldn't get my parents to take me to the doctor. Not even 15 minutes later, I heard a soft knock at the back door. I slipped outside quietly so my parents wouldn't stop me. Mrs. Thompson gasped when she saw my arm. "Sweetheart, this isn't just a bruise. You need to go to the ER right now." She grabbed her car keys without another word. Sitting in her passenger seat, I finally let myself cry. Not just from the pain, but from the relief that at least one adult cared enough to believe me. When we reached the hospital, the triage nurse took one look at my wrist and called for immediate scan. "This doesn't look good," she muttered, gently holding my arm steady. As I lay on the hospital bed, the machine humming around me, I had no idea that those scans were about to uncover more than just a broken bone. They were about to reveal the truth my family had been ignoring for years. When my parents finally showed up at the hospital, the look on their faces wasn't concern, it was fury. My mom's eyes were sharp, her lips pressed into a thin line, and my dad's jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. I thought maybe they were upset because I was hurt, but the second my mom opened her mouth, I realized how wrong I was. "How dare you come here without us?" she snapped. "Do you have any idea how this makes us look?" I sat there on the hospital bed, arm wrapped in a temporary cast, still throbbing with pain. I couldn't wait. I tried to explain. I was in so much pain, and you wouldn't listen. My dad cut me off, his voice low and dangerous. Don't start with your drama, Jennifer. You're 17, not a baby. You could have handled it at home. Instead, you make us look like bad parents. Tears stung my eyes. I wanted to scream at them that I wasn't faking anything, that my arm was shattered, but the more I tried to explain, the more their faces hardened. Then Rachel walked into the room, her big brown eyes wide and full of fake innocence. She's just a child, Mom said, pulling Rachel close like she was some kind of fragile angel. You know how she plays around, Jennifer. And you, she turned to me, her voice dripping with disgust. You twist everything into a tragedy. You've always been like this. It was like being stabbed in the chest. My arm hurt, but their words hurt worse. I felt like I was drowning and no one was even trying to pull me out. Rachel glanced at me from over Mom's shoulder, her lips twitching into the smallest smirk. Later that night, back at home, I caught her in the hallway. She leaned close so only I could hear, her breath hot against my ear. They'll never believe you, she whispered, her voice cold and certain. I'm the baby. They'll always protect me. You're just the jealous one. Then she laughed, a low, cruel laugh that made my stomach twist. I stood frozen, my cast heavy, my chest tight. It hit me that my family wasn't just ignoring me. They were actively turning me into the villain of my own story. No matter what Rachel did, she would always be shielded, and I would always be painted as dramatic, unstable, or bitter. That night, lying in my bed, I stared at the ceiling and realized something I'd never dared to admit before. My parents weren't blind. They weren't fooled by Rachel. They chose not to see her cruelty because it was easier to believe that I was the problem. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, I knew the people I should have been able to count on would never be on my side. 2 days after my parents dragged me home from the hospital, a knock rattled the front door. When my mom opened it, 2 people stood there, one with a clipboard, the other in uniform. My stomach dropped. Child Protective Services and a police officer. The report the doctor had warned me about had already reached them. They introduced themselves politely, but their eyes scanned everything. The house, our faces, the tension in the air. We need to ask some questions about Jennifer's injury, the woman from CPS said. My dad's jaw tightened, and my mom plastered on a fake smile, inviting them inside like everything was normal. Rachel was sitting on the couch, curled up with a blanket like some sweet little angel. The second they asked about the fall, she burst into tears. Real tears, as if she'd rehearsed them. It was my fault, she sobbed, her voice trembling. I asked her to play a game. I didn't mean for her to fall. But Jennifer, she's always so mean to me. She yells at me, she pushes me around. I was just trying to have fun. My mouth dropped open. That's not true. I shouted, but my dad snapped. Jennifer, stop it right now. The CPS worker turned to me gently. Jennifer, can you tell me what happened? I tried. I explained everything. How Rachel dared me to stand on the broken chair. How she laughed when I fell. How my parents refused to take me to the hospital. But every time I spoke, my mom would roll her eyes or interrupt with, "She's always been dramatic." My dad added, "She's 17. She wants attention. Rachel's just a kid." I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. They were painting me as unstable, like I had made the whole thing up. The officer scribbled notes, his face unreadable, while Rachel sniffled and leaned against my mother's shoulder. It was gaslighting at its finest. I knew the truth, but everyone around me acted like I was crazy for saying it out loud. My chest tightened, my head spun, and for a terrifying moment I wondered if maybe I really was the problem. Maybe I really was too dramatic. But then the CPS worker pulled out a file. The doctor's reports don't support this being just a simple accident, she said firmly. The MRI shows a spiral fracture, and there are signs of previous untreated injuries. That's consistent with intentional harm or repeated dangerous behavior. Silence fell across the room. My mom's face went pale, and my dad looked away. Rachel's crocodile tears slowed, her bottom lip trembling as if she had been caught off guard. For the first time, someone besides me was saying it out loud, that this wasn't just me being dramatic. Something darker was going on. I sat there, cast heavy on my arm, my heart pounding. Maybe I wasn't crazy. Maybe the truth was finally starting to crack through the lies. The weeks that followed felt like living in a fog. Even after the investigators left, nothing changed inside my house. My parents acted colder than ever, speaking to me only when they had to. When they did, it was usually to remind me how much trouble I'd caused. Rachel, on the other hand, floated through the house like she was untouchable, her smirk growing wider every time our parents defended her. It became painfully clear that no one in my family was on my side. I could scream the truth until my voice broke, and they would still look at me like I was the villain. That's when I decided I had to protect myself, even if no one else would. I bought a cheap notebook from the dollar store and began writing everything down. Every cruel whisper, every lie she told, every time my parents turned a blind eye. I wrote dates, times, and word-for-word conversations. If no one would believe me, then I'd make sure I had proof. At school, I tried to stay invisible, but Rachel wasn't done playing her game. One morning between classes, I felt her presence behind me on the stairwell. Before I even turned, I heard her giggle. Then a sudden shove hit my back. My foot slipped on the step, and my stomach dropped. I thought I was going to fall headfirst. But just as my balance gave way, a hand grabbed my shoulder and steadied me. It was Mr. Harris, my history teacher. His eyes flicked from me to Rachel, who was now standing there with the fakest look of surprise plastered on her face. "I was just joking," she said quickly, her voice high-pitched and innocent. Mr. Harris didn't answer her. Instead, he studied me carefully. "Are you all right, Jennifer?" he asked, his tone serious. I nodded, though my legs were still shaking. For the first time in a long time, someone had actually seen what was happening. Rachel tried to brush it off, laughing and skipping down the hall as if nothing had happened. But when she glanced back at me, her eyes were sharp, almost daring me to say anything. I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I wrote it all down in my notebook that night. The date, the time, the push, and Mr. Harris catching me. It became my routine. Every time Rachel tried something, I recorded it. Every smirk, every whisper, every trap she set. Slowly, the notebook filled with evidence, each page like a piece of armor. And though I didn't say a word to Mr. Harris, I noticed the way he started watching more closely, like he understood something was wrong. He never said anything outright, but in his silence, I found a strange comfort. For the first time, I wasn't completely alone. Someone had seen through Rachel's act. Still, at home, the isolation was crushing. My parents had already made their choice. But deep down, I knew the breaking point was near. Rachel was pushing too far, and soon, the mask she wore for everyone else would start to crack. It didn't take long for the stairwell incident to come back to haunt Rachel. A few days later, I was called into the guidance office at school. When I walked in, Mr. Harris was there, along with the principal and a woman from Child Protective Services. My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear. Mr. Harris explained what he saw on the stairs, that Rachel had shoved me, that I almost went tumbling down a full flight. "It wasn't an accident," he said firmly. "If I hadn't been there, she could have been seriously injured." His words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The CPS worker turned to me. "Jennifer, we need you to be honest with us. Has this happened before?" For a moment, I wanted to shrink into myself and say nothing. That was what I'd always done. Stay quiet, keep the peace, try to survive in silence. But something inside me cracked open. I couldn't carry it alone anymore. My hands shook as I pulled my notebook out of my backpack. I placed it on the desk, the pages thick with everything I had written. "This is all of it," I whispered. "Every time she's hurt me. Every time my parents ignored me. She pushed me off the chair on purpose. She laughs when I'm in pain. And my parents, they don't care. They just call me dramatic. They've always protected her, no matter what." The room was quiet except for the sound of the CPS worker flipping through the pages of my notebook. Dates, times quotes, it was all there in black and white. I broke down then, sobbing into my hands, years of frustration and loneliness spilling out all at once. Mr. Harris rested a hand on my shoulder, steady and reassuring, while the CPS worker nodded slowly. "This lines up with the doctor's reports," she said. "Repeated untreated injuries, a spiral fracture, now an attempted push down the stairs. This isn't coincidence. It's a pattern." For the first time, I felt the weight shift. They weren't brushing me off. They weren't telling me I was dramatic or making things up. They were listening. That evening, CPS showed up at my house again, this time with a firmer tone and sharper questions. My parents tried their usual excuses. Mom claimed I was overreacting. Dad said Rachel was just a child. But the investigators weren't buying it. They asked about my medical history, about past bruises and injuries that were never treated. My parents' answers wavered, and I could see the doubt creeping into their faces. Rachel tried to turn on the tears again, but this time, it didn't work. The investigators had my notebook, the teacher's report, and the hospital records. The puzzle pieces were fitting together, and the picture wasn't the one my parents had been trying to sell. For the first time, I felt the truth wasn't just locked inside me. It was out in the open, and no matter how hard my family tried to cover it up, the authorities were starting to see it for what it really was: neglect, abuse, and a sister who had gone too far. When the police arrived at Jennifer's house, the air shifted into something heavy, almost suffocating. Their voices were calm but firm as they asked to speak with her parents. Mr. and Mrs. Carter tried to keep their composure, smiling too brightly, acting as though this was all some misunderstanding. But the detectives had Jennifer's notebook, her medical records, and now the teacher's testimony about the stair incident. The smiles didn't hold for long. Rachel sat slouched on the couch, chewing gum like she didn't have a care in the world. When one of the investigators turned to her and asked about the stairway accident, she smirked. "Accident? She tripped. "Don't blame me if my sister can't even walk straight." Her words were sharp, mocking. The detective didn't respond. He just kept writing notes. That silence seemed to irritate Rachel more than anything. The questioning went on for an hour. At first, Jennifer's parents tried to laugh it off, saying Rachel was just a playful child, that Jennifer was sensitive, and that the notebook was an exaggeration. But the detectives pressed harder. "How do you explain a broken arm ignored for days?" one asked, showing the hospital timeline. Her parents stuttered, glanced at each other, but no answer came. Then Rachel slipped. She rolled her eyes and snapped. Maybe if she wasn't always acting like a victim, none of this would have happened. She deserved it for tattling all the time. The room froze. The investigators immediately noted her. Her parents tried to hush her, but it was too late. The mask had cracked. Jennifer felt both sick and vindicated hearing Rachel say it so openly. For years, she'd been gaslit into doubting her own experiences. Now Rachel's cruelty was undeniable, recorded in front of officials. By the end of the visit, everything had shifted. The police informed her parents they were under investigation for neglect and possible child endangerment. Rachel herself was not off the hook. Juvenile charges for reckless endangerment were being filed. The officers explained it calmly, but Jennifer saw her mother's face drain of color, her father's fists clenching by his side. Jennifer sat there, silent, her heart racing. This was what she wanted: justice, truth finally being recognized. Yet as she watched her parents sit in shock and Rachel pout in defiance, an ache grew inside her. She had spent her whole life longing for their love, even after all the pain. Now, instead of love, there were handcuffs and charges. That night, Jennifer lay awake staring at the ceiling. For the first time, the house felt different. Not home, more like a crime scene. She told herself she didn't need their love anymore, not if it came wrapped in cruelty and denial. Justice was stepping in where family had failed. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the hollow part of her chest that still wished things had been different. Jennifer sat on her Aunt Carol's porch, her arms still wrapped in a cast, but her heart strangely lighter than it had felt in years. For so long she thought revenge meant fighting back, yelling louder, or trying to prove herself to the people who refused to see her worth. But now, as the dust of the investigation settled, she realized something profound. Her revenge had required no screaming, no plotting, no fists. All it took was the truth and patience. The moment she told the full story, everything began to unravel for her family. Rachel, once the golden child who could do no wrong, had slipped during her interview with investigators. She snapped at them, rolled her eyes, and let her cruelty shine through. The mask cracked, and for the first time, adults outside their household saw her for who she really was. Jennifer didn't need to lift a finger. Rachel's own arrogance did the work. Soon after, the juvenile court ordered her into a facility for reckless endangerment, where she could no longer play her twisted game. As for her parents, the charges hit them like a storm they couldn't outrun. Neglect, willful ignorance, fines they couldn't afford, court dates they couldn't charm their way out of. Jennifer had always begged for their attention, for even a scrap of their love, but now she understood. They had chosen to laugh at her pain. And now, they were being forced to sit in the same courtrooms she once begged them to take seriously. Their reputation in town, once pristine, was shattered. The neighbors whispered, and their smug smiles disappeared. Jennifer felt torn at first. She remembered sitting in her room as a child, hugging her knees and praying that one day her mom would just hold her, or that her dad would defend her instead of brushing her aside. A part of her still longed for that version of them, the one that never really existed. But now, with every headline, with every summons to court, she saw what they truly were, people who had chosen their comfort over her safety. Living with Aunt Carol was a different world entirely. Carol wasn't perfect, but she listened. She made sure Jennifer's arm healed properly, kept track of her appointments, and even left notes of encouragement in her lunch bag. For the first time in years, Jennifer felt seen, not as a burden, not as a liar, but as a girl who deserved love. Her revenge hadn't been about payback in the way Rachel might have done it. It wasn't about breaking anyone down. It was about letting the truth breathe until it did the work for her. And it did. Rachel was behind locked doors, her parents tied up in endless hearings, and Jennifer, without lifting a finger, finally had peace. On that porch, with the sun setting and Aunt Carol humming inside, Jennifer whispered to herself. The truth was enough. And for the first time in a long time, she believed Jennifer sat by her bedroom window, staring at the faint scar running down her arm. The cast was gone, but the memories weren't. Everyone else called it an accident, a childish mistake, a silly game gone wrong. But she knew better. Her sister's game wasn't a game at all. It was a knife disguised as laughter, a cruel shove dressed as fun. She still remembered the moment vividly, the sharp snap of bone, the scream stuck in her throat, the echo of her parents' laughter as they told her not to be dramatic. That laughter haunted her. It wasn't the sound of parents comforting their child. It was the sound of people choosing sides, the sound of love being rationed out unfairly. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. The MRI didn't just reveal her broken arm. It revealed the cracks in their family. Investigators came, questions were asked, and the truth they had buried for years was suddenly clawing its way to the surface. Rachel's smirk faltered. Her parents' confidence shook. What they thought they could laugh off became evidence, testimony, and charges. Jennifer often thought about the irony. She hadn't screamed for revenge. She hadn't plotted. She hadn't fought back in the ways people expected. All she did was tell the truth. The truth became the match, and her family's lies were the fuel. Even now, Rachel was gone, sent to a juvenile facility. Their parents were tangled in court dates, their reputations cracking under the weight of neglect charges. Jennifer no longer lived in that house. She had packed her things and moved into her Aunt Carol's home, where, for the first time, she was believed. Carol listened, not with suspicion, but with care. That was all Jennifer had wanted her whole life, someone to listen. But freedom didn't erase scars. At night, she still jolted awake, her body remembering the fall before her mind did. Sometimes she swore she could hear Rachel's laugh, the high-pitched, mocking sound that preceded her shove. That laugh bled into her dreams, turning them into endless games where Jennifer always lost. And yet, when the nightmares ended, she woke with a strange strength. Because no matter how terrifying those memories were, she had survived them. Her broken arm had become more than a wound. It was proof. Proof that pain could drag the truth into the light. Proof that games have consequences. Jennifer closed her journal after writing her final words. Rachel thought she'd win her game. But games end, and players face the consequences. The line lingered in the air like a haunting melody. She knew her story wasn't finished, not really. Healing took time, and scars whispered even when silence fell. But she also knew something else. She had already won, not by playing, but by refusing to play at all. Her sister's game wasn't a game. It was a confession, and Jennifer had lived long enough to watch the world finally hear it. Do you believe Jennifer was right to let the truth speak for itself instead of fighting back, or should she have confronted her family head-on? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd really like to hear your perspective. And if stories like this keep you hooked, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next one.